and advice. Views expressed by the guests or individuals are not endorsed by Maitri. Maitri is a nonprofit organization that provides holistic and confidential services to support and empower South Asian survivors of familial violence in the San Francisco Bay Area. Please visit our website at www.maitri.org to learn more about us. Today, in this first session of the series, we are going to have a lively discussion on how to succeed as an immigrant in the United States. Whether you are a new immigrant or a seasoned immigrant, we hope that you will either learn something new or relate to the experiences shared here. Our facilitator for this afternoon is Srividya Prakash. She is the CEO of Antara International, where she leads the organization's efforts with her deep passion for public health, with a focus on reproductive health, health systems, and human resources. She's also an active member, a volunteer, or board member of several nonprofits that focus on education and domestic violence in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's joined today by Reggie Mary Baloyos and Farzana Hussain, and you will hear more about them from Srividya herself. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Oh, and definitely use the Q&A chat session to ask questions. We will try to answer as many questions as we can in the 1 hour that we have, or we will get back to you if you leave us your email ID. So over to Srividya.
Thanks, Kashmira. So let's kick off today's discussion on our journey as immigrants, the experiences, joys, and challenges that have shaped us along the way. And we really hope this conversation will help our listeners identify and reflect on their own experiences. And for some of you starting out, find tools to take charge of and shape your journey positively. We have two wonderful guests joining us today. Farzana Hussain came to the US from Bangladesh while in middle school with her family. She will be talking about her experience as well as her family's experience of immigrating to the United States and putting roots down. Currently, Farzana is doing her master's in public health at the University of Southern California and working as a research coordinator at UCSF. We are also joined by Reggie Baloyos, who has more than 10 years experience in the not-for-profit sector working with diverse underserved communities. She is a champion of human rights and has a master's in international and multicultural education with an emphasis on human rights. She is also the author of Become a Successful Immigrant, Roadmap to Independence in the US. As an immigrant herself from the Philippines, Reggie believes that every immigrant must have a guide and know what to expect in a new country of destination. Welcome, Farzana and Reggie. Delighted to have you with us. And to all our listeners today, please do post your questions in the Q&A box. We will come back to these in the second half of the conversation. So going back to the beginning, Farzana and Reggie, when you first arrived in the United States, we're curious to know what brought you here. What were your initial thoughts and impressions, things you were excited about, maybe a few things that you found unpredictable? Farzana, if you want to go first.
Okay. Thank you, Vidya, for the introduction. So a little bit about me. I moved to the States when I was only 11 years old from Bangladesh with my mom and dad. My older sister was already here and she was married and living with her husband and kids in the Bay Area, which is the reason why we decided to move to come to the Bay Area to be closer to her. She was a great help. She helped us find a place to live, resources, and showed us how to get around. So having her here had been a great help. And moving here at a young age had its own set of challenges, which were very different from the challenges that my parents faced. When I moved here, I expected the transition to be pretty smooth since I knew how to speak English, read and write in English from back home in Bangladesh. But when I moved here, I realized the schooling system here is a lot more different. We were excited to move here because of all the opportunities. America is considered the land of opportunities, and also because the quality of life is generally better here. So as a family, that's why we decided to move here. And I thought I knew what to expect from high schools and middle schools here from watching Hollywood movies and TV shows when I was little. But when I moved here, I realized even though I knew English, the way a lot of my teachers were speaking and like the colloquial way of speaking in the States were very different from what I was used to. So sometimes I would just like stare at my teachers like talk, and I would not understand anything when I just first moved here. And yeah, the schooling system was very different, as we didn't have physical education or any emphasis on it in back home, where it was very intensive here, as well as we had a uniform back home, where here we had to, in public schools, we didn't have any uniform, and we just had to sort of dress however we want. And so I think academically I did well after moving here, but I feel like it was difficult. It was a challenge to like make friends, connect with others. When I moved here, like 95% of the students were born and raised here, and they knew people from either high school, I mean, either from elementary school or had classes previously with each other. So moving here as a new immigrant, it was a challenge just fitting in, knowing how to like dress, how to talk, how to like connect with others. I think those are some of the challenges as a middle schooler I faced. And then when I went up to high school, I think the challenges were with knowing how to do college applications and SAT prep and like just things like that, just like knowing how the application process and everything works here. Since I didn't have a family member who went to school, like high school or middle school here. So it was a little difficult not having any guidance with those things, which made the transition to here very difficult. But I was able to like go through high school, and then I eventually went to a community college, and then I utilized all the resources that they had available there and transferred to UC Irvine and graduated in public health sciences, which led me to my current role at UCSF as a research coordinator. And it also allowed me to like pursue a higher education and go get my master's at USC. Like currently I'm going for my MPA, Masters of Public Health at USC. So overall, I would say my experience was, it was difficult earlier on, but as I went through it all, I sort of adjusted, assimilated, and found like ways to utilize the resources over time that were available to me.
Thanks for sharing that, Farzana. That's definitely a unique transition coming into the country as a middle schooler. Reggie, curious to hear what your journey has been from the Philippines to the United States.
Thank you, Vidya. My story as an immigrant started about more than 10 years ago. And I landed in San Francisco, was fascinated with a lot of tall buildings. We've seen it in the movie. There's these tall buildings and also the quite crooked small roads. But in, looking at the past and really diverting into what circumstances I have been through, the one thing that's, I think I look at back and focusing on to maybe it's easy to assimilate knowing that I completed college. But then when I come to United States, what I've learned is that not everybody is accepting to our accents. We all have different accents. And I still, remember when, I arrive and I see a lot of individuals and they were like, oh, where you're from? And then say, oh, I can tell you in your accent that you're from this place, right? And so that's kind of different because, when we are in our country, nobody has an accent. So nobody can say like, hey, you have an accent. So you kind of like, what just happened? The other thing too, trying to understand and settling down in the country. One piece that I realized is that, back in our home country, especially where I am at, we own a land, we build our house. We don't owe anyone anything, right? Many of us. So when we come to United States and they said, well, you know, you actually need to have a credit card, and that concept of I need to have a credit in order for me to build and establish my life. Like, what kind of country is this? That's kind of like unfamiliar. And the other piece was that we know education is expensive, but it's not really, you know, when I entered, you know, community college and I said, you know, it's okay. But then you realize like, wait a minute, education is actually quite expensive. I understand when I was already started going into the system, if you live in a nice zip code, you will get a better education. If you live in a zip code where poverty is rampant, and unfortunately, the education system is quite, you know, not there. But the good thing is that we have a lot of teachers that are really working and pushing forward to get someplace, you know, better. And the other piece is that as much as there's plenty of transportation in the United States, what is unpredictable is that it's actually not easy to just get into this transportation, right? You actually have to learn and navigate and try to learn the maps. So these are pretty much my initial thought. Actually, I was at first, there was that sadness and also happiness looking back these memories. But thank you.
I actually want to pick up on something you just said, Reggie, because I thought that was it's very interesting. You mentioned the driving and the maps. So my husband and I moved to the US as mid-career professionals ourselves. And we expected the move to be easy because we'd been overseas, we have colleagues from overseas, and even then there were surprises that we never anticipated. So the inability to drive, for example, navigating freeway traffic, how do you accelerate from 0 to 60 miles an hour? Even filling the gas tank the first time, I thought I was going to blow up the car. I had never filled up a gas tank. And these seemed like huge challenges in that first week. Everything in the US is huge, it's fast, it's sprawling. You go to the grocery store and you pick up groceries, there's no way you can walk home with those bags. I think that definitely took us by surprise, just how big everything was. Thank you for sharing that. Coming back to you, Farzana, something that is unique about your experience is that for your family, this was a multi-generation move. You moved here with your parents, and I'm going to guess the immigrant experience for your parents was different from yours. Curious to learn whether their qualifications, their work experience transferred well here, or did they have to retrain or start from the beginning or take a few steps back? And in particular, we would love to hear about your mother's experience in starting a new business in the United States.
Thank you, Vidya. Obviously my parents' experience was very different from mine. So while I was like trying to figure out how to survive middle school and high school, they had to figure out the financial health of the household and how to provide for the family. And it was a very difficult move for my parents to leave behind like family, relatives, and friends and move to a completely foreign place. So they had to use up a lot of their life savings to like move here and settle down. And before we moved here, my dad had a government job in Germany for around 25 years, and my mom was a housewife. So when we moved here, both of my parents could not speak English fluently. So that was very difficult for them to find a career job and career path here. Also in the Bay Area, most of the immigrants who move here, they move here in when they're younger, with the job or for school. My parents moved here in their 50s, which made it very difficult for them to like have the skills needed to find a job here. So luckily, my mom had learned how to cook authentic traditional Bangladeshi food from my grandma since she was little, and she was very passionate about cooking. And that was a transferable skill in the United States. She took a step forward and further and hired a famous chef from Bangladesh who taught her how to cook very Shahi Bangladeshi food, such as like biryanis that are only sold at restaurants and things like that. And she could also like tailor clothes, like blouses for saris, things like that. So when she moved here, she saw a very high demand for those skills that she had with cooking and like tailoring and things like that. So she started catering for large events and at Indian or Bangladeshi festivals. And soon she got a lot of compliments on her food, and a lot of people suggested that she should start her own business, own restaurant. So she took a leap of faith and decided she's going to start her own restaurant. And my dad, my sister, my brother-in-law have been very supportive for the business. And on our grand opening day, it was a huge success. Like, we ran out of all her food in like an hour or two, and there was a huge line out the door. So this was a very interesting experience for my mom. Like, she's been working super hard on the restaurant, managing the restaurant. It is like a lot of work. It's been very challenging for her. There's a lot of challenges with the pandemic happening, the retaining workers and things like that. And she's been very brave with managing the restaurant and handling those challenges. And as a family, we couldn't be like more proud of her. She basically moved here so me and my sister could like pursue our dreams and our goals. But it's been great to see her pursuing her own like ultimate American dream, pursuing her passion and doing something with her talent. So she's been very working hard and really achieved a lot with this restaurant. And as a businesswoman in America, coming from being a housewife in Bangladesh. Yeah.
And that is truly unique. So it's not just the immigrant experience, it's the immigrant and the entrepreneurial experience. And I'm sure we would want to hear a lot more about that when we get to some of the Q&A. Thank you for sharing that. Clearly a remarkable woman. Reggie, coming back to you, I would love to hear about the kind of economic or financial challenges you faced as an immigrant into the US. In particular, I think we would love to hear about any risks that you might have had to overcome, and what kind of networks and skills did you find yourself leaning into, either on the academic side or within the Filipino community, or other than that, what kind of networks and skills did you find the most helpful?
Well, personally, navigating my own independence in the United States was quite difficult. Part of it is that as back home, asking for help is a shameful thing. So I made a decision to come here to settle down. And so I was actually was not prepared to that things will go wrong, right? And so I was actually keep asking myself, would I want my family to know what happened? And would I want then say, hey, I actually need money, right? And just say, well, this is the decision you're making, so you live with it. And with those questions in my head, I have to, figure out actually from going to a friend's house, staying at a friend's house, talk to a friend, and this is actually very important thing that sometimes we have to just ask. And the other thing with this one, so I asked my friend and say, hey, I actually need a place to stay. And she was like, yeah, no worries, you can stay with me. So then, of course, I have some relatives in the United States. So I called my aunt, and she was like, and I think what is devastating is she said to me, like, you're asking people, you're like a dog without an owner. And I was kind of like, what? And this kind of, it's like putting me down. I already have these doubts and things like that. At the end of the day, basically, I have to, not, let's say here, being strong and just say, okay, my friend says, maybe you need to ask a community organization, so meet people and started talking to people. But I have to kind of let go of my ego, ask my relatives and says, I'm struggling. And I am not asking for you to give me money, but if you are okay with it, I would borrow money from you. And unfortunately, that's what needs to be done. But what I realized at the end of the day, that whatever was my perception about my family will not help, it's actually different. My family would actually says, we will be there. Let us know if you actually need more help. But what I realized also is that I need to stand up on my own. I made this decision as an adult to come to United States to take care of myself. And so the first thing that I have to do is actually, try to figure out who is around me that can help me. That particularly to go to the library, right? We have to start learning what we can do. Also figuring out by just reading a lot of things. Well, what is important? How can I get through what I get through? Sometimes we will meet, let's see, interesting people. Some of them have a good plan, and some of them do not have plans, and some of them just want us to influence basically the way we think. But we have then to make a decision, and that for me I learned to observe my environment, really looking at so if people are talking to me, right, and they said, you have to do this. And my first question in my head is that this person is telling me this, but is that her or his life is really moving forward, right? So try to observe, read more books and really understand the concept of all these things. What is important and what is, are you still there? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. What is important and what we needs to be done. The other piece is to focus on personal growth, but also connect with the community members, because we know community, not just the Filipino community, but every other community has a resource that can help. For example, there's a community resource besides the library. There is those magazines that we can read and follow through, and other pieces that we can, learn to navigate. But I'll get it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reggie, for sharing that. And again, I wanted to pick on something you actually mentioned, which has struck a chord with me. You talked about how important it is to give up on your ego and be willing to learn again, because you're doing so many things new. Sharing a personal note here, I was struck by how important credit is in this country. And Reggie, you touched on that as well. We all come from cultures where the culture back home is really different. We are strongly encouraged to be self-sufficient. Taking a loan is a bad word. If you take a loan, I mean, you are supposed to return it as soon as possible. And we had trouble renting our first apartment or buying our first car. We had no credit history. We didn't want to take a loan. We did not have a letter from a previous landlord. And trying to figure out how to establish your credibility in this country was really hard. And it took time for me to get over this mental block and learn how to take a loan, how to make small payments, how to establish that credit history. We'd also not experienced how easy it is to get credit cards. And of course, in the initial rush, we had 4 credit cards, and it's very quick, easy to lose track. And learning financial discipline was another key skill. But you're absolutely right. Being willing to learn a lot of things afresh and change your mental frame of reference really goes a long ways. Thank you for sharing that. Switching tracks a little bit and getting to some of the more cultural nuances of being an immigrant. Let's talk about adapting to language, a very common issue faced by immigrants, and both of you have mentioned it in the context of knowing English, but finding it difficult here, or accents. How did language affect your education or job prospects? And did your family face any particular language challenges? I'm just curious to know how you handled that. Farzana, if you'd like to go first.
Okay. So for me, the challenges moving here, something that Reggie also mentioned, was with the accent. Even though I came here knowing English, I knew how to read, write, and understand it. But just having that accent, like going to middle school or high school where everyone was like born and raised here, and that's like 95% of my peers were born and raised here. Coming in with an accent is very difficult to like communicate with others. Really makes you like stand out. So I think from an earlier age, I was very like mindful of it, and I tried to assimilate. But as I got older, I learned the value of having that accent, how it makes you unique and different from the others, and how it's valued. So that was my experience. For my parents, both of my parents did not speak English fluently when we moved here. And they came here at an older age. They were in their 50s. It is very hard to learn a completely different new language at that age. and with no previous exposure to it. So I think my mom and dad took some like community ESL courses to be able to manage their day-to-day activities, but it was still very difficult for them to like do certain tasks, like get their driver's license, which was only in English that they could do. They had other languages. They had Hindi, Spanish, a couple of other languages, but they did not have Bengali, which made it very difficult for them to get their driver's license. But they like studied very hard and got it. They were very determined. They both got their driver's license. A lot of the times they had difficulty interpreting documents, like official documents, so they would always come to me or my sister for help with that. It's also difficult with like medical care and medical documents and interpreting those. They often don't have interpreters for those. And my mom was, she could speak Hindi pretty well. So that came to her advantage, as a lot of the workers at Bongos that she works with speak either Hindi or Bengali. So it really helps her like be able to like communicate with them in Hindi. And Bay Area also has a lot of services in Hindi and a lot of Hindi speaking doctors and people of other professions. So it sort of helps her get by it being able to like communicate with them. So that was our experience.
Got it.
Yeah.
Reggie, how about you? You did touch upon accent earlier. Did you have any challenges with language?
Definitely. So, good thing there's a phone extra. My computer just went down. So, language, even though in the Philippines we are taught to speak English back then in first grade, and that, teachers are really, really strict with grammars. You don't talk if you don't speak English. But what I realized when I arrived is that still it's different. Because especially for the Philippines, where we are influenced by different cultures, and so language is also kind of different. Using the language was sometimes like, did I use that right or did I use it wrong? But the other piece of this, like, when you talk and then people will like stop, it's just weird, and you're just like realizing like, did I say something wrong, right? Or did I offend somebody? And the other piece of that too is that sometimes what I realize is that we need to actually speak slow in order for other people to understand us, because often we just go just like as normal, the speed of what we say. So that is an issue. And as it goes on, I mingle with a lot of immigrants, especially with my work. But what I realize is that if we cannot speak, then the challenge is how we gonna get a better paying job. Now, a lot of individuals who actually struggles with the language most likely will be employed by places where they can navigate, of course, can talk in their own languages. But this also means that the opportunity is less. And considering this information is that, I always said, no matter what happened, we need to start learning, wherever we want to go, right? So started learning the language, practicing. And I know there is this piece because of accent and maybe worried about grammar and errors. We kind of like reluctant to say more. And so we do not practice. I realized this when I was talking to someone and I said, I do understand that it is comfortable to speak in your language, but if you continue doing this, you're not practicing. And so therefore you are not really moving forward. And so I think it took some people for a while, but sometimes we don't understand that it's good to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. But that comfort is actually, unfortunately, sometimes stops us from getting where we need to go. And also with that is that, we need to build our self-confidence. The moment we started talking, we realized actually there's nothing wrong with me talking. Either you want to listen to me or you listen to somebody else, right? So these are the things, and we are all have these capabilities. We just need to really, really start moving forward. Thank you.
No, I love that. And you're right. I mean, our accents or our stylistic use of the language sometimes causes misperceptions. People make assumptions about our skills for a job based on our accent, and there's no replacement for practice. I mean, absolutely. One aspect of language that I did want to highlight based on our personal experience was just how language became a communication barrier between our children growing up here and their grandparents and family back home. I do regret at this point not emphasizing our own language early on. We were afraid that the children would be confused, they would not speak English properly. And I did not appreciate that my own experience growing up in Mumbai. We were comfortable with 4 or 5 languages. We learned English at school, we had 2 mother tongues, we had friends from different backgrounds, and we all did okay. And I should have just realized the kids would be okay too. And so that is one aspect of language I do wish I could do over again. But I mean, there is still time to make up that one. Moving from language then to culture more broadly. Um, I'm sure we all have the experience of having to navigate two very different cultures. There are societal norms and expectations. There are roles of genders. There is the attitude towards elders, pop culture, food, entertainment. And Farzan, I'm very curious to hear, did you embrace it? Did you resist it? What kind of tips did you learn? Clashes within the family? Do share some anecdotes from those experiences.
Um, I think the key here is to being able to identify with both cultures. And for me, as moving here at a very young age, I did embrace most of the cultures. I met people from very different cultural backgrounds, and I have friends from very different backgrounds. So it's not just two different cultures. I think United States, it's like a combination of like various cultures that we learn about. And I think it's important for us to like accept it and be proud of our origin, but also be open-minded about where we are and respect those differences in other cultures. I've grown up to appreciate the food and entertainment and even pop culture here, but I also do appreciate the Bangladeshi culture and how I can add my own uniqueness to the culture here. But I think my parents moving here at a much older age, they tend to more resist the culture here and sort of they stuck to their own ways of thinking, own beliefs and traditions and things like that. And that's important as well. But I mean, recently I've seen a lot of like changes in my parents as well, where they embrace more of the cultural norms. One example of it would be when we first moved here, my mom was very against like having a dog as a pet, as a household pet, which is very common here in a lot of households. But then as she like interacted with other people with who have dogs, like cute dogs, and now she really thinks dogs are cute and she's open for me to like have one in house. So there's like subtle changes, like subtle acceptance of like cultural norms. And I think it's a very subtle changes. It's not anything grand. And I think another thing is we do in Bangladesh, we do come from a patriarchal society, which is also a generational gap. As when I grew up there, things were more different for me than it was for my parents growing up. So my mom owning a business here, coming from a housewife role in Bangladesh, definitely challenges those cultural norms and gender roles. So yeah, so I definitely think we have adapted and embraced some of it, and also there was some resistance.
Thank you. Reggie, please do share some of your experiences on the cultural front.
Well, culture is always interesting and exciting. But as already mentioned by Farzana, we are a melting pot in the United States. There's actually different cultures that is here and around us. In fact, Filipinos can relate to from Indians to Mexicans to Latino communities, right? Like there's family, and family is very important. That we have to respect our elders, and we actually have to listen to them, even though we don't like what they're saying, right? So these are already part of the cultural part. Also, everyone is our aunties, even though they're not related to us, right? A friend of a friend, it becomes an auntie, a friend of a friend, and they're actually closer to us. And this is actually what I embrace as the collectivism, right? But there is also a part where I realized that patience is very important into adjusting. For example, being practicing individualism. There are moments in our lives where, for me specifically, I said, I need to pay attention how I figure out my own health. And some of this, probably some of our family members will say, I visited a family member in Los Angeles and they were saying, you eat, right? And it's good to eat. But unfortunately, we also have to remember, wait a minute, if I'm by myself, then I need to take care of myself. And so there are some sort of this that we need to practice individualistic. Now, the other piece is also what I want to look at is that this fixed mindset and the growth mindset. I realize that some folks will say, in our country, in our culture, this is it. You have to follow, right? And then, as we are navigating, and this is why observation is very important, that if we really want to grow, I mean, for me personally, I said I have to embrace something that is working. People will say, okay, why are you listening to this person, right? And then we talk about concept of race and all this politics about race. But this is the other piece too, that sometimes there are things that probably it makes sense, right? And I remember one thing, like I realized, I said, I cannot believe that this person will actually say something about this, but it is one of my, you probably hear this say, it's like birds the same feeder flocks together, right? So, so when we are looking at back and it's like, when I was young, I was like, what? And then, I don't hear that with too much because they correlate it with negativity, right? But what we have seen is that people with ambition actually usually come together and they help each other. But this is collectivism. But if you also look at, there is an individualistic of that, because some of the culture will not practice. I mean, not even culture, that is actually individual preference, right? But we see this as a cultural preference because sometimes people can come together. And other piece is beliefs. Long time ago, they would say, we have this idea that you should not, shower during the time where I think it's a Good Friday or something like that, right? But then you look at, I mean, that was like belief, like where did it come from, right? And I have to ask a question: is this even healthy to follow through? That's just a little example, but these are the things that we can probably find a balance at the end of the day. And I would encourage every immigrants out there to find balance and to see if it's meaningful to you, right? If it's meaningful, then go ahead. If it's not meaningful and you know that it will not help you develop and grow, then there's your answer to your question.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we're almost at the end of this conversation. So I'd like to take a few minutes to step back from everything we've said today. With the benefit of hindsight, if you could look back at your younger self, three things that you wish, three pieces of advice somebody gave you to prepare for a successful immigrant's journey. It could be advice, it could be resources, a toolkit. What advice would you want to give to your younger self? Farzana, any three things that come to mind?
I think definitely having available resources for high school teens or middle schoolers when they just move here would be very beneficial. Some of the resources can be like college application information, free SAT prep, or just career services for newly moved immigrants who are just starting out in like middle school and high school, and they have no idea how to navigate through the schooling system here. And also, I think having like maybe a mentorship program, like a big brother, big sister program for a lot of the immigrants moving here, having those resources would be really helpful, even with just general assistance with how to get by with school, and like maybe more ESL courses, things like that would be very beneficial. And I think for my parents, something that Reggie mentioned, like having more financial management courses would help, such as like how to use credit cards and like taking out loans, things like that. I mean, we were lucky to have my sister who could guide us through a lot of that, because she's an accountant herself, so she was able to help us a lot with guidance on that. But having those and just ESL courses, things like those resources would be really beneficial for immigrants in general.
Got you. Thank you. And Reggie, how about you? What would be the three pieces of advice you wish somebody gave you?
Well, most of this is in my book, of course, but here's the three things that I would say. Never give up on learning. We thought we finished high school, college, and we thought we're done. But the reality is that there's so much things in life that we need to learn, and that by learning, we actually progress. So never give up on learning. And so develop this growth mindset, understanding that even though there's failure, in every failure, there is a lesson that we have to look at in order for us to move forward, because failure is just there for us to actually move beyond our abilities and capacities. And the second part of this is, there's so much things in the world and culture, food. Explore these places, right? I always said, when we explore, we learn. Sometimes we just need to go. I know people love to go into small cities, but I would always say, try to go into little cities where, sometimes rural areas. This is actually sometimes where we actually have some more to think about, and maybe we can help. And find a mastermind group. Farzana, this is a really great thing, right? The sideways to this is that, we all need people that we can connect. And at the end of the day, we need people that actually help us to grow. And that's why having this mentorship group, having to go into this financial place group, helps us to overcome some of these adversities that we should not be, unfortunately, but we face it sometimes. But there are places that can help us. This is part of the reason too. I know they said that I found a group that's called the Second Chance Project. It's to make sure to find this place to coach young individuals, because as the time goes by, we realize COVID has impacted a lot of our youth, getting depressed, getting sad, but also it also stopped them to dream. And so that's where I can give my three piece of advice.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll share just my one big takeaway, which I've learned the hard way. I think we need to recognize that while our journey is unique to us, it is not necessarily unique. And it has happened thousands of times before us. So there are a lot of resources out there, and one needs to be comfortable asking and not trying to reinvent the wheel every single time, and getting over that fear of thinking you're all alone and being willing to open yourself up and asking for help really takes one a long way. So that would be my big takeaway and my big advice to my younger self. So we're going to request our listeners to start putting their questions on the Q&A chat. And while they're doing that, one final closing thought from each of you. On balance, all things considered, what is the one thing about the US and its culture at this point that you most cherish at this point in your immigrant journey? Farzana and then Reggie.
So one thing I really appreciate about the US is the different cultures and how diverse it is, how we celebrate people from different cultures, backgrounds, and religions here. And it's very exciting that I get to meet people from different cultural backgrounds and learn about their culture, food, and traditions from them, as well as like talk about and teach them about mine. And I think that diversity here, especially in the Bay Area, it's great, it's amazing. And I like how open-minded everyone is here. One thing I cherish about my country, Bangladesh, is also the culture. When even in the Bay Area, when we come together to celebrate an event and we get to dress up in our traditional clothing and share the same kind of tradition here. And I think sharing that identity binds us. And I especially love sharing that culture, food traditions with my non-Bengali friends here and sort of carrying that on.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And Reggie, how about you?
Well, as you mentioned, United States is a melting pot of a lot of culture, and with that, it's amazing. And I think to realize that immigrants actually build this country, right? And we've seen a lot of hard work, resilience, sacrifice. They made it, and so I said to myself, it's time for me to contribute, to the things and work that they have done, as we continue this journey. And also the other piece is just, try to redefine ourselves the best way that we can help our communities.
Thank you so much, both Farzana and Reggie. It was wonderful having this conversation, and we could keep going. And I'm sure there are lots of questions for both of you from the audience. Uh, I'm going to hand it back to Kashmira to take us through some of those questions.
Thank you, Sri Vidya. And just wanted to, before we start Q&A, I would like to draw attention that we will be posting a link in the chat window for all attendees for providing feedback. So please do share a few minutes to fill out the survey so we would know how we did and how we can get better. And I see that the link has just been posted. So please do fill out that survey. Would be very helpful to us. So here's the first question. It is interesting that Reggie brought up the issue of accent and how well it is accepted here. Do you think an immigrant with a preferred accent, either the classic British English accent or a French accent, would have faced the same experience as someone from a less preferred region, such as Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia?
Reggie, Farzana, either of you could take that.
Well, I think it's a matter of where we are at, all right? In California, we might say that accents are quite accepted, but there are places where if we probably go to rural areas where we will say that you might prefer, other accents, such as British or French accents. So depending where we are at, so that's just based on my experience. But where we are, because Sacramento is a capital, and also San Francisco and Los Angeles, so there's quite of acceptance to different accents. But as I said, depending on places where we are at.
Farzana?
I think there's definitely differences of where you are, like workplace, education wise, and some places celebrate those accents more than the others. Like going to middle school here, I think no matter what accent you have, kids only like connecting and being friends with others who sound familiar, who talk familiar to them. So coming in that situation, I don't think accents are as looked good upon, versus as you grow older and you're in a workplace where you have coworkers that are very smart, very intelligent, and having an accent does not like change anything of their abilities or anything like that. So I think it varies based on the setting of where you are.
Absolutely. I also find that my accent at this point is almost like the clothes I wear. I have a different accent at work, a different accent with friends, a different accent when I'm visiting back home. And it's something one almost ends up doing subconsciously, but it's probably a reflection of how we think that accent is welcome or otherwise in the setting we are at. And that is a fascinating topic in itself, but I do find I switch between accents very comfortably these days. Kashmira, back to you.
Yeah, that was interesting. So the next question is, have you faced any biases from other immigrants? Asking as a student who came here as an F1 on an F1 visa, I was looked down upon by H1B holders. They were superior. And if yes, how did you handle that?
This is very, very common, the dynamics, because if we look at even our own countries, I mean, where I come from in the Philippines, if you come from the area in Manila, people would like to talk to you. If you come to the area of Visayas, and it would be different. And I think that we carry that on in this country. The reality is that is present, biases are present, but what we can do is to ensure that we make people understand, right? And this is where actually our advocacy comes in, to make them understand that we are no different. We are all human beings. At the end of the day, we are here to learn, and also we are here to help each other to grow. I do understand, some immigrant communities will say, you know what, the other immigrant communities are lazy. But then my question is that who are you to actually say that when you have not been with them and even know their struggles, right? So, and I think that that's just, we need to be, biases will always be there, and it's the reality, but we are here to, advocate that we will find some sort of equality.
Although I don't know as much about the different student visas, but I would definitely add that different immigrants definitely have different experiences, like someone coming from a different country. When I moved here, a lot of people, actually no one knew where Bangladesh was moving here. Even a lot of no one really knew where it was. So I think definitely we were more of a minority in the country, so definitely faced more discrimination coming from other immigrants who already sort of had a community here. So yeah, I think different immigrants, and depending on what kind of community you would have different experiences.
And I would add to that, I often find it's human nature to segment and differentiate. We do that when we are in our home countries. We do that everywhere. And in the early days, when the immigrant population in the US was much smaller, I'm going back probably 40, 50 years, it was probably all just one South Asian community. Then when you have more people from each country, it becomes Bangladeshis, Indians, Sri Lankans, and then we break up within that, within a state, and then within a state, within a city. And that's human nature. And we bring many of the biases from home back with us. I don't know if I have a good answer in terms of how one overcomes that, other than just awareness and learning more. But we do carry our biases and our desire to group ourselves with us wherever we go. Kashmira?
Yeah. So next question is, were you able to connect with other immigrants in similar situations, as you probably were not facing all this in a vacuum, and it was not a unique situation?
With my work with immigrant communities, there are individual, and I said this comes with individualistic perception. Some may want to be able to communicate with others, and I if they are open, then I am able to connect because they are open to connect. But for example, if they are already hesitant and they already judge you by the way you say things or by your character, then that is most likely will not happen. I have one individual who called over the phone, and I talked to her, and she was so angry, right? And the last thing I said, you know what? Here's what I can tell you. If you want me to talk to you face to face, please come in. Maybe it will be a different perception, right? So she comes in, she was open enough, she comes in and we have a conversation. It's actually, we've been friends like for 5 years, right? So that's like a huge, big change, right? But I think that it is up to an individual whether they are open to to relate to that other person.
Farzana, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think definitely having a community when you come here would help. For me, it was a different case because I didn't know anyone my age at my school who also had just immigrated to the States. So I think you would have similar experiences that you can share and like have someone to like listen to and talk to about. But yeah, I didn't have that, but I think having that would definitely help, having that community.
Absolutely. And we've come a long way. I mean, when we came here 20 years ago, maybe the temple was a point of common contact, or maybe the local grocery store where you picked up your Indian groceries, when put up those little chits asking for help or asking for a room to share. Those were common points of contact. Today, with online resources and so many groups, it's so easy to find communities of people that one can plug into. It's definitely a new experience now in terms of being able to find people that you can connect with. Kashmira? Mute.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Srividya, Reji, and Farzana. What a wonderful discussion that was. And a huge thank you to all of you for sharing the stories with us and having such a thoughtful and rich discussion on what it means to be an immigrant and how to successfully navigate all these hurdles that we talked about to become a productive member of the community. Also, a huge thank you to all of you who have taken time on a Saturday afternoon to join us. Stay tuned for our next session, which will be on Saturday, June 5th at the same time. And we hope you can join us again as we delve into the next topic, which is returning to the workforce after a break. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Farzana, so much for joining us today. Thanks to all the people who tuned in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vidya, awesome job, Vidya.
Thank you. I can't see you.
You were awesome.
Have Reggie and Farzana left as well?
I think so.
I still see 6 people.
Those are attendees. Sonu left too.
Okay, looks like everybody left, only the 3 of us. Can we see all 3 of us? At least the 3 of us can. Okay.
Fabulous.
Awesome job.
Good job. It went so well.
Went so well, right?
No tech issues.
Yep, no tech issues. And
finished
very
in time.
smoothly. Timing, you were very good with timing. It was just perfect.
Yeah.
You managed the time very
You're
well.
very natural, like very well done.
It was very enjoyable, actually. I really, even though we actually rehearsed this once, they all had their nuances during the actual conversation. I now want to go and get dinner from this place, Bongos.
What?
I want to go and get dinner from Farzana's mother's place, Bongos.
Where is
Bongos,
it?
yeah. It's in Fremont, I think, right?
Fremont? Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
We were actually looking for Bangladeshi restaurants. I didn't know there was one.
Yep. So this is a good one for you because otherwise we only have the typical Punjabi.
Man, palak paneer and chole, beyond that, we can't do anything.
Yeah.
Jaya, do we know what the profile of people who joined, or was it like in line with what you were expecting? I mean, no, it's too early for feedback, I know, but any feedback at all?
I'm actually looking at the feedback. Not everybody, that is the problem, right? Not everybody answers the questions, but in general, it looks like they all liked it.
Good. That's good. No, well, as and when you get more feedback, it would be lovely to hear that.
A couple of things I will just read out. Very well presented. Well done. Really enjoyed this very genuine conversation.
Nice.
Somebody said had a trouble with Eventbrite. They took a long time to send me a link after my registration. I don't know who that was because all registrations, all link I tried to send. There's one comment says Vidya did a great job of inviting the panelists and specifically such that we heard both of their views. Somebody has said did not hear question 3 above clearly. I don't know what was question 3. So these are the few comments that we.
Question 3 was if they were able to
Question 3 was to Reggie. What kind of risks did she take?
From me or from Vidya?
Oh, okay. Question, yeah. That's right. In the Q&A question 3, that might have been there.
Yeah, I think mine was, where did it go?
Vidya, awesome job.
Yeah, she did it.
It's so much fun.
Yes, and especially the first one, if it goes well, right, then you feel like much more energized and hopeful about the rest of it.
So Vidya, are you going to moderate the rest of them too?
I don't know.
No, different people. We wanted completely diverse set of people to do
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
So the
yeah.
third question was, were you able to connect with other immigrants in the same situation? I can't believe they were facing all of this in a vacuum, as in it was not a unique situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just reading out a couple of the feedback comments that we got. So,
Okay. Mm.
so it went really well, right? I was without any glitches.
Mhm.
Vidya, you did an awesome job. You managed
Very
the
good.
time great.
Yeah.
You're
Kashmira,
still recording.
opening
You
and
want to
closing was very good. Everything went very
Yeah,
good.
we're still recording. I hope you have a way of cutting off the last